or trying to.
Technology, don't you love it? I was muted, beg your pardon. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Licensing Subcommittee for the 3rd of July 2020. I'll be chairing the committee meeting today. I would like to advise that this is a live virtual meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee, and today we will be using Zoom to provide a live stream to members of the public. Please can we ask you to bear with us when we are dealing with numerous internet connections. Sometimes this can cause a slight delay.
Sammy, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, apologies. So thank you, Chairman. During the meeting, all participants except for the Chairman will be muted, and this should remain during the whole of the meeting unless you have asked to speak. May I take this opportunity to remind you that should you wish to speak during the meeting, you use the raise the hand button, which can be found at the bottom of the participant screen. The Chairman will then be notified of your request. When speaking, if we could ask you to unmute yourself to speak and then mute yourself once you have spoken. When asking a question, please could we ask that you refer to page numbers within the report or agenda for ease to officers. If we have to adjourn the meeting, the Chairman will advise of this and the anticipated length of adjournment. Those that have made the licensing officer aware that you would like to speak at today's meeting will be called forward to speak at the appropriate time. Please can we ask you to speak loudly and clearly. Once members have completed the process of hearing all representation, they will then move into a confidential debating session. The decision will then be heard in a public via a further Zoom meeting, and this decision meeting will be available for viewing at 1 o'clock. Chairman, if we can now complete a roll call of members present. So I will call your name, and if I could just ask members to say present, please. So we've got the Chairman, Councillor Graham Carpenter.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
Present.
And Councillor Gaylor.
Present.
Thank you. Chairman, I can advise that officers present at the meeting today. We have Elaine Hignett, Licensing Officer, who will be presenting the application to the committee. Denise Wilby, Election and Licensing Manager. David Lowen, Solicitor, MP Law. And myself, Sammy Wintle, Corporate Services Manager. Members, to advise you that today we have Nicole Wright from La Ronde, applicant's agent, Mr. Thurston, who is the applicant, Griselle Britton, Commercial Manager for Great Yarmouth Borough Council, providing representation on behalf of the Environmental Services team, Mrs. Jane Ingram, Mrs. Angela Taylor, Mr. John Richardson, who will be speaking on behalf of Mr. Carl Hess, Mrs. Julie Staniforth, and Mr. James Colclough, who will be providing representation against the application today. Thank you, Chairman. We can now start to move to the agenda items.
Thank you, Sammy. Moving on to the agenda, item number 1 is apologies for absence.
Chairman, I can confirm we now have no apologies today.
Thank you, Sammy. Item number 2, are there any declarations of interest? I'd like to kick off by saying that I have a declaration of interest in that the applicant, Mr. Thurston, contacted me yesterday by telephone to introduce himself to me. The case was not discussed. Thank you, Sammy.
Can I also declare an interest? I know
John Thurston, but I haven't actually seen him for about 35 years. So we go back a long way, but I haven't seen him for about 30 odd years. And I've spoken to John on the telephone, but we didn't discuss the application in any detail. Are there any more declarations of interest?
Chairman, I can confirm we have no further hands raised.
Yes, thank you. Item number 3 on the agenda is an application for a new premises licence. The committee are asked to consider an application for a new premises licence under the Licensing Act 2003, Ormsby Manor, Main Road, Ormsby, St Margaret, Great Yarmouth. I'll now hand over to the licensing officer, Elaine Hignett, to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a
Sorry, Chairman. Sorry, Elaine. Sorry, just before you start, the solicitor has just raised his hand, David Lowens.
Hello, a couple of very minor items, councillors. On your agenda, paragraph 3, you'll note that the options available to the subcommittee mention conditions as the authority considers necessary for the promotion of the licensing objectives. That should read appropriate. The second point, your options available include refusing the proposed designated premises supervisor. And lastly, I think the application technically is from Ormsby Manor Limited rather than Mr. Thurston personally.
Thank you, David.
Okay. This is an application for a new premises licence submitted by Ormsby Manor Limited in respect of a premise known as Ormsby Manor, Main Road, Ormsby St Michael, Great Yarmouth. The application proposed the following licensable activities and timings: plays, films, boxing or wrestling, live music, recorded music, dance, anything similar to live music, recorded music or dance, indoors and outdoors from 10 AM to 2 AM each day. Sporting events, 10 AM to 2 AM each day. Late night refreshment, 11 PM to 5 AM each day. And supply of alcohol on and off the premises, 8 AM to 2 AM each day, plus a non-standard timing of 24-hour sale to residents. The application is on pages 5 to 28 of the agenda. 22 representations were received objecting to the application. Representations were received from Environmental Health, the Norfolk Wildlife Trust and Ormsby St Michael Parish Council, plus 19 representations excuse me, were received from local residents. Copies of the representations are located on pages 29 to 56 of the agenda. Unfortunately, one representation submitted by Kaylee Bartram was not included in the agenda document. However, this has been provided to members. In response to the representations objecting to the application, the applicant provided a letter dated the 9th of June giving further information on the application. One objection was withdrawn upon receipt of this letter. The applicant subsequently submitted an amended application which proposed the following licensable activities and timings. Films, indoors and outdoors, 10 AM to 11 PM each day. Late night refreshment, indoors and outdoors from 11 PM to 2 AM each day, and a non-standard timing of an additional 3 hours for resident guests. And supply of alcohol on and off the premises, 8 AM to 2 AM each day, and a non-standard timing of 24 hours for resident guests. The amended application was sent to all objectors. Environmental Health provided a revised list of conditions to be added to the operating schedule. The applicant has agreed to conditions 2 and 3, but not condition 1. Comments received from the objectors have been forwarded to the committee members and the applicant. The number of objections remains at 21. The revised application and covering letters are located on pages 59 to 93 of the agenda. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Elaine. Members, do you have any questions of the licensing officer?
Chairman, we have no hands raised from either members or representations today.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Nicole Wright, who's the applicant's agent, to make a short opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like, making my opening statement, I would like to say that we intended that a joint statement be made because some of the more relevant points perhaps will be made better by my client who lives and knows the premises a lot better than I do, and of course has lived there for 15 years or more, and so is very familiar with concerns that have been raised in the letters of objection. One of the key points I would like to address in the report, which referred to my client not agreeing to the first condition that was set out by the officer, which was submitted to my client, was because of course that condition was a condition which proposed that only 12 licensable activities could be carried out in any 1 year. And given that the timings proposed were the same as that in the application, so the client had proposed to run those events between 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. in the revised application on the basis of discussions with officers, and in light of the objection letters received, it was felt that it was not reasonable to run a viable business on the basis of only 12 licensable activities per annum. And that was the key reason why that condition was felt to be unreasonable. I would like to leave some of the time in addressing you to my clients. So apart from being available for questions, that's the key point I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Are there any questions of the applicant's agents from either members or persons giving representation? I'd just like to kick that off by asking Nicole, with regard to the 12 showings of films throughout the year, what are the films that are going to be shown, if they're going to be shown every day or more frequently than that? Can you advise us?
Well, the exact films to be shown are the details. I do not know the details at this point. I can't, maybe that's a answer. But it really is on the basis that it's not just the film, it's any licensable activity. So it said that what the proposed condition said is any licensable activity, you could only have 12 licensable activities per annum. And so it although film was the only licensable activity applied for, it was an overly restricted condition that was felt could be a little bit more lenient. So effectively, if you were only showing film in the summer, then that would be okay. But sometimes you can have quite a pleasant autumn, and you might want to continue showing film throughout the autumn as well. And so you'd be only looking at a few weekends if you're looking at 12 films per annum.
Okay, I was just wondering what the content of the films might be, whether they're commercial films or films to do with weddings or whatever. But I'll ask that question of the applicant later on.
Commercial.
Chairman, sorry, we have a question from David Lowen, solicitor.
Just to clarify, councillors, the proposed condition from Environmental Health number 1, you'll find it page 95 of the agenda. was not any licensable activity. It was licensable activities are only permitted outdoors or in an outdoor marquee or similar structure. So unless environmental health tell me I'm wrong, I read that as dealing with only outdoor licensable activities rather than any licensable activity.
Thank you, David, for that point.
Chairman, we do have some questions from some of the attendees, if that's okay.
Carry on.
So we have a question from Griselle Britton, Environmental Health.
Hi, Chair. I just wanted to confirm that Mr. Lowens is correct, that it was 12 licensable activities outside.
Thank you. Chairman, we have a question from Mr. Thurston.
Just go ahead, Mr. Thurston.
Okay, Councillor Graham just raised the question about films, which films would be shown. The emphasis is not on films, it is simply the fact that the point was raised, and as I understand it, if we were to profit from showing a film, it has to be a licensed activity. If it were not licensed, then we could show as many films as we wanted if they were for charitable reasons, etc. But as you know, charity begins at home. So in order for us to show a film and profit from that film, it has to be a licensed activity. Anything at all, films or otherwise, associated with Ormsby Manor would be akin to Ormsby Manor, as in Ormsby Manor, Ormsby St Michael, Norfolk, north or south, is a beautiful place, and we wouldn't do anything that would contradict that. So I really, as I sit here now, cannot think of what film, but I assure you, if we were to show a film, it would be family orientated. It would be there for either a family audience or mature audience, and done in such a way that it complemented the setting, and that goes for absolutely anything that we would consider doing. Whilst David just pointed out that it refers to outdoor activity, this may cover some other questions that may be up and coming. We're very aware of what can go right and what can go wrong with a wedding venue, with an event venue, with businesses in general. And we have a great deal of experience. We've been around the track a few times, and we're very aware that the biggest problem that such a venue can have is complaint. So with the experience that we have, that would be borne in mind in everything that we do. And so as a business plan, that is why we will be led by accommodation in the first instance, weddings in the second, and outdoor events in the third. So the emphasis is really not on outdoor events, but nevertheless, as Nicole has just said, if we are an event venue, hopefully we will be allowed to put events on that would be daytime led, family led, and not a nuisance to anybody.
Mr. Thurston, sorry, can I just interrupt? Thank you for all that information, but we are restricted to questions of the agent. Thank you for your explanation, and you will get an opportunity later on to say your piece. But if we can just restrict it to questions of...
You'll be pleased to know I'm going to mute myself. Is that the general idea? Should I?
Sorry, Mr. Thurston.
Should I mute myself now out of the meeting?
Yes, please, if you could.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any more questions of the agent?
Nicole did have her hand raised. I don't know whether she's removed it now. I don't know whether she wanted to come back.
My client has answered the question I was going to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chairman, we have a question from Councillor Wainwright.
Yes, go ahead. Muted.
Well, it was, excuse me, it was really a question more for the licensing officer, well, and the environment officer, I suppose. This condition number 1, you're talking about 12 days a year, but under a license, as far as I understand, you could have, I think it's up to 50 special events a year, if you wanted to. I'm not sure what the name of the license is, but you can apply for sort of one-off events, and I believe that's 50 a year. I just want to confirm that's the case. And my other question is, well, not a question, it's just a statement really. I think we're getting a bit hung up on this film thing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's part of the licensable activities, and Mr. Thurston's quite clearly said, I mean, whatever film is shown is rated by the film industry, so you can only show certain films to certain people, but I don't quite know why we're getting hung up on what type of films might be shown if the application is approved. I mean, it's completely irrelevant in my mind.
Thank you, Trevor. I thought it was a little bit relevant, but there you go. Are there any further questions for the agent?
Well,
Just got some
could you answer the
clarification.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, we just got some clarification from Elaine, please.
Just to clarify, any premise is authorised to have, it's called a temporary event notice.
That's it, yeah,
So it's a application whereby they can temporarily license for an event. A premise is authorised to have a maximum of 15 temporary event notices per year.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Elaine, did you say 15?
15, yeah, 15.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for the agent?
Chairman, I can confirm I have no more hands raised.
Thank you, Sammy. I would now like to invite Mr. Thurston, who is the applicant, to give evidence, please.
Could you just clarify that, Graham? You'd like me to give evidence?
Yes, it's your opportunity to speak now, to present your case, really, to give the evidence that you want to present.
Okay, well, maybe to elaborate on my overrun earlier.
If you could make this fairly short, if you would, thank you.
To summarise, we were granted permission to use the house and grounds for weddings and events. The application most recently for a premises licence is just a standard thing. It's got to be done for the sale of alcohol predominantly, but obviously the timings, etc., go with it. I have 2 premises licence elsewhere in the country for shop premises, but with those shop premises, if they actually are a cafe, then they are allowed to sell alcohol. They are allowed to provide live entertainment and recorded music. It goes with the license. I've got no idea that there would be so much fuss over this, and there's absolutely no doubt that the fuss has been caused by a letter that was circulated containing information that simply isn't true. I've done my very best to contact everybody, invite them to our home to sit down and discuss the issue, to explain, to clarify. No one has taken me up on that offer, so I have not had the opportunity. But we are local people. With 6 generations down the line in Norfolk. We're a well-respected family. We have a lot of history, and that history is recorded in some establishments within Norfolk. So the family is and always will be well remembered. We're not going to tarnish a good reputation. We're very much residents of Ormsby. We're very aware of people's concerns. We take them very seriously, and we would never do anything to harm or upset anybody, because in doing so, we would harm and upset ourselves. As I maybe went on too long about before, Ormsby is a beautiful setting. Everything that will be done at Ormsby will be done in a beautiful manner. We're not going to put, as has been suggested, any loud, rowdy, rave type events, anything that is noisy, certainly nothing that goes on too late into the evening. And any client that wishes to use Ormsby for a wedding will be very well instructed in as to, you know, how people are to behave. There will be restraints, and they will have the opportunity day one to say, well, this is not the venue for us. Rules are rules, and if a business, and if an event, and if a wedding, just imagine if it was your son, your daughter, if things are to go smoothly, then they have to be very well managed. Was something that just popped into my head, that it's just gone out of my head, but so everything is down to oh, that's what I was going to say. I've seen the comment about hotel use. And just to clarify the hotel use, we are not a hotel, as in you walk to a hotel, you enter the hotel, you go to the bar and order yourself a drink. That will not be possible, because alcohol will only be served to guests. So Ormsby Manor, as my wife Kim would prefer it to be known, is Ormsby Manor, bespoke rooms and events. The sign on the gate will say, by appointment only. The public are not permitted to just arrive and walk in. So if they did, they would be reminded that appointments are necessary. So it is prepaid paying guests that would be served alcohol, much the same, exactly the same as anyone who is the guest of a hotel or similar venue. That's where the 24-hour guest thing comes from. It's personified in a minibar in a room. The 8 o'clock is only if and when a bride may request a champagne breakfast, who then has to go off site. If someone arrived at 8 o'clock and asked for, even if they were a paying guest, a large gin and tonic, the answer would be no. That's why it starts at 8 o'clock. So the onus is on us, ladies and gentlemen, to administrate, to run our business in a professional manner. And I've always hoped, certainly most recently, that we hopefully will be considered innocent until proven guilty. Lots of the comments that have been made are as a result of the misunderstanding of a letter and relate to things that may happen. I can assure you they will not. Does that cover something?
Yes, thank you very much for that explanation, Mr. Thurston. I'd now like to invite any questions for Mr. Thurston from either members or persons giving representation.
Chairman, we have a question from David Lown, solicitor.
Chairman, just to flag, I'm neither of those, but just for clarification and explanation of the licensing law. A couple of matters have been said that were not in the application papers. And I think you need to be clear whether or not Mr. Thurston, the limited company, is offering these as intended conditions on their proposed operating schedule. Because if they are so offered, they will be fixed. So you heard that only pre-paying staying guests, I think I heard that right, I may have been wrong, would be served alcohol. You heard that an 8 AM start was only when a bride was asking for a champagne breakfast. With a bit of work, we can make those conditions but then they mean exactly what they say. Only prepaid staying guests would be served alcohol, and frankly, that's unlikely for a wedding, so I'm undoubtedly got that bit wrong. But 8 AM for champagne only when a bride asks could be a condition. And I don't want to disadvantage the applicant company, so I just need to be clear what is being offered and which is more a optimistic view of how the premises may be behaving.
May I speak? Or...
Yes, Mr. Thurston, you can reply to that if you wish.
Okay, well spotted, David. The same occurred to me seconds after the words left my mouth. Of course, at a wedding, the guests of the wedding party would not be staying at Ormsby Manor. They would not be residents in that sense. But you're quite right. Further clarification on what I just said. Obviously, if you were to hold a wedding at Ormsby Manor, then your guests would expect to consume alcohol. So does that clarify that part of your comment? I was referring to the hotel use. So what I meant to get across is that people, the general public are not invited to just walk in and expect to be served alcohol. They would only be paying guests, residents. But you're quite right. Let's get it quite clear that guests to a wedding would not be residents of Ormsby, but yes, they would be served alcohol. And you're absolutely right. Makes no difference to us. There is right and wrong, appropriate and inappropriate. And I assure you that when we were running the Queen's Hotel in Portsmouth, the licence started at 7:30 AM for the very same reason, because once in a blue moon, a working bride who they get married or they've been married, taken their vows elsewhere, still have to go to work. And so sometimes they do request. It's a rare occasion, but it has been known. So that's why it starts, and that's why. So that's a bride that would be off-site. If the bride were a guest, the sale of alcohol is 24 hours. Not many people want to start drinking alcohol at 8 o'clock in the morning, but that is the purpose. So the bride would be off-site. So the 24-hour resident part of the license wouldn't apply, and that's why that would be the only reason a bride would be served alcohol, which would be a champagne box fizz. That's it. Anything else, I'm sorry, that's not what we do. Have I answered the question or the comment?
David, do you want to reply back?
I'm looking at page 80 of the agenda, Chairman.
Thank you.
And 24-hour sale of alcohol to residents' guests, I think everyone can understand. Then it says occasional sale of alcohol before 11 AM to visiting guests attending weddings and special events. I really don't want the applicant company to box themselves in to something they don't really want. So whilst Mr. Thurston has mentioned brides and champagne breakfasts, that's a lot narrower than page 80, which frankly is a sale to anybody attending a special event, undefined, presumably from 8 AM in the morning. That can be rewritten to any alcohol before 11 AM is only to a bride and her guests for a wedding. But that does take out special events. And I think you need to be clear what the applicant is actually asking for.
Nicole may wish to comment on that. They are, I don't mean this in a derogatory way. They're not my words. They were tweaked. And if Nicole tweaked them, I do believe that Nicole is trying to cover, much as the Boathouse, I noticed on their license, it's with reference to some occasion. I can't think what the occasion would be. Maybe something to do with Christmas, New Year, any situation where, if appropriate, because appropriate is the key word, alcohol may be served to wish good luck, to a cheer. It's not to start drinking alcohol before 11 o'clock just for the sake of it. But I do take your point, David, and thank you very much for your consideration. We do not wish to be boxed in, but we do wish to operate legally and in an appropriate manner. But as with any establishment that serves alcohol, and there are many, the onus is on us to see fair play and an appropriate behaviour.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston.
Chairman, Nicole does have a hand raised if we wanted to go to Nicole for some clarification.
Yes, please, Nicole first. I think Trevor wanted to have a word as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think the point that Mr. Lawrence makes is a good one. And my client's key focus, of course, is the weddings. And hence, he focuses on the wedding breakfasts. The reason why I did propose and discuss with my client, including special events, is sometimes you may have people staying or coming over at New Year's or Christmas, when, other festive seasons where it is probably customary for some to have earlier on in the day. And so I thought it would be a reasonable condition. And also sometimes when you're making an application, you don't always foresee every eventuality, every situation that may arise. And it sort of takes away some of the administration on behalf of my client and on behalf of the council to sort of consider perhaps a more reasonable condition to allow special events in addition to champagne breakfast at weddings. So thank you.
Well, if the condition can be amended, changed by agreement to include everything. Before I do go on, I think Councillor Wainwright wants to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, obviously on page 80, where it talks about the occasional sale of alcohol before 11 AM to visiting guests, attending weddings, special events, I don't think that's at all unreasonable. I mean, it does say occasionally. And, I've attended many weddings throughout the country where you travel, perhaps you're staying overnight on the wedding night, but you travel down and you get there probably at, 10 o'clock, 10:30. It's a lovely day. And you say, can I have a pint of lager or whatever? I just can't see any problem with that. I mean, it happens all over the country. We don't want to make this too restrictive so that, the applicants are looking over their shoulder all the time at the exact minute on the clock. I mean, quite clearly, Mr. Thurston said this is not going to be abused. I don't think we should be putting conditions on you can only have a glass of champagne at 8 o'clock. If somebody comes down from 200 miles away to attend a wedding in Ormsby, which is bringing money into the village or to the borough, that we should say, well, no, you can't have a drink till 11. It's just ridiculous. I don't think it's going to happen much. And, you've got Christmas and New Year when people might come down. And quite clearly, I mean, Christmas and New Year, I have a drink at 10 o'clock in the morning if I go out. So, we don't want to make this too restrictive. I mean, I think the occasionally sale of alcohol is fine. It's only my opinion. Obviously, it's up to other members, but we just do not want to start making this so restrictive. Other licenses in the borough that do this are not that restrictive, believe me, and I've had a look at some. Thank you.
I think it's a question of getting this wording right on the application because they will be tied to it when it is written down. David, can this be looked at?
Chair, there was a couple of items. The first one is that the non-standard timings, Roman numeral 1, 24-hour sale of alcohol to resident guests, fully understand that. Roman numeral 2, frankly, is irrelevant and confusing. The supply of alcohol starts at 8 AM, by the column on the left. Whole Roman numeral 2 could be deleted and we'd all be a lot better off. I raised it to try and make sure there wasn't an operating schedule limitation that you weren't aware of.
Thank you. That's
Second,
clear. Oh, sorry.
second, and that's all right, a very important point, just to flag my concern that no prejudging should happen. You've not yet heard from the objectors. This is an application for premises license. It is not a guaranteed grant, and it should never be referred to as a guaranteed grant or anything like it at this point. You need to hear from the objectors and maintain an open mind, and that's all councillors.
Thank you, David, for that. Are there any more questions, Mr. Thurston, from anybody?
We have a question from Mr. Richardson, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Richardson, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity.
Good morning.
I must say that I thought I understood what this application was all about, the revised application, and the last 10 minutes or so, I feel a bit more confused than I was at the beginning. Speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, and as you know, several of the other local residents, we don't have a problem about a wedding venue, and we fully understand, and I think Councillor Wainwright quite rightly made the point, we've all been to weddings where sometimes the drinking starts a little bit early. I think we got more of a concern, and by the way, 24-hour drinking in a hotel is not an unusual thing, and it's very easy, in my opinion, to maintain and control. I think it's the outdoor event side, when the original application was till 5 in the morning, now it's been retracted to 2, and people have mentioned the boathouse. And they, I believe, have I think it must be a restriction that they basically go inside from about midnight. And
Mr. Richardson, really, we're restricting this part of the session for questions of the applicant.
Okay. Questions to the applicant. Could there be?
You'll have an opportunity to speak later as well.
That's fine. That's right. Could they say exactly what it is they really want then? Because I personally think that all this discussion about, you know, the bride might want a glass of champagne at 8 in the morning, it all seems like a bit of a red herring. What is it that the applicant is actually asking for?
Mr. Thurston, you want to come back on that? Mr. Thurston, if you're speaking, you are muted.
Unmute. Sorry. What we're asking for is very standard, very normal. Mr. Richardson, you just mentioned the 5 a.m. The 5 a.m. are not our words. They are in the premises license application, which I have said several years ago is antiquated. I feel it needs updating, but that's referring to late night refreshment for the provision and consumption of hot food and beverage. It does not refer to alcohol. The reason we ask for 2 a.m. as the boathouse has asked for and been granted permission is because that's the absolute limit to a function. For obvious reasons, if every client of ours were to say, I don't want this to go on until midnight, that's music to our ears, because it's less for us to do, it's less onerous, it's easier to manage. But if you are paying a pretty sum to host your daughter's wedding, and you probably would wish the wedding to go on till 2 o'clock, it is up to us, with the experience that we have, to ensure that that function goes on until that time without causing disturbance. There isn't anything that I can see, and I would like anybody else to comment if they think that we're asking for something that is abnormal that is so different to any other wedding and event venue, including hotels with the grounds to host such an event as in wedding. And I have said that the outdoor part of the venue would be mainly daytime use, with the emphasis on not doing anything that would offend anybody, including noise. But somewhere along the line, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, the onus must be down to us. It has been said many times that if we are granted the permissions, and lest we forget, we were granted permission to use our house and grounds for weddings and events. And as a result of that, we have spent a great deal of money. We are now talking in excess of £1 million spent based on that permission. And now we feel that we're in danger of having our hands tied, and there is absolutely nothing that we've asked for, nothing that we have applied for that is anything other than normal. So we're talking about a very, very serious situation here. And the very serious situation applies to us much more than it does to anybody else. And I would hope that everyone is considering that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where we are with things at the moment.
Mr. Richardson, are you happy with that?
I beg your pardon. Yeah, I'm back on that. I think we'll just park it until we get to a later stage in the discussion, because I still don't really think that what exactly that people are looking for here is being clearly stated in terms of weddings, other types of event, in terms of the alcohol licensing. And we have other concerns, but as you said, Councillor Carpenter, we'll have an opportunity to discuss those a little bit later.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Are there any other questions of Mr. Thurston?
I just have a question from Councillor Lowens, please. Councillor Lowens, sorry, David Lowens.
Thank you very much. I've been promoted. There's reference made in the letter you sent in, Mr. Thurston, to policies and similar. Can you help as to what those policies are? I think you were thinking of noise. In other words, how the noise will be controlled. Noting the boundaries of the application, I guess you mean noise from the films, as that could be outdoors, and noise from persons consuming alcohol till 2 AM, and if they're a guest at any time.
Yes, David. Well, noise is noise, wherever it comes from, whether from people or amplified music or unamplified music or recorded music or from a film. Noise is noise, and that's what we will contain. And there are many ways to do that. Our son put a letter in, or one of his managers put a letter in, whatever, just explaining the fact that he is a very successful, well-known professional sound engineer. I mean, this is just absolutely coincidence, but it's a fact. And he has had lots of contracts for very prestigious clients, and many of them were asking for the containment of noise, which he has delivered every time. When you talk about, in general terms, without being too technical, but I can assure you I cannot be anywhere near as technical as our son, is all about, I did write it down somewhere, is all about how you produce the sound in the first place. And the way to cause a disturbance is to invite DJ Dave in with a large amplifier, a large speaker, and that's just brute force and ignorance. When you get a professional sound engineer, they will distribute the sound closer to everybody's ear on site. So you're talking about a lower overall volume, a better quality of sound, closer to the people that need to hear it and far away from the people who don't. So I've said before, I can only repeat myself, that we know that noise can cause a problem, and that we will take every precaution, every step to make sure that doesn't get out of control. David, you mentioned policy. Obviously, as a business, we need policies for everything, for health and safety. Obviously, we've spent a great deal of money on fire regulations within the house, and everything has to have a procedure, as we know, as you certainly do as a solicitor. So everything we do, from welcoming guests, induction, explanation, health and safety, fire risk, precautions that will be taken to keep the site tidy, and obviously deep cleanliness. We know all about that with the COVID pandemic. These are all things that will have a policy in place, because they are a requirement, and they are also there to be read and understood, and staff will be tested to prove that they understand. And of course, if they don't adhere to them, then that would be an issue that would be taken up with them. They are the policies that I refer to, and that's how we will contain any noise.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Thurston. Does that answer your question, David?
I'd prefer you to call me John. May I call you Graham?
I beg your pardon, John. I got muddled up.
Okay.
Chairman, councillors, I raised it because this is a formal committee. Should you decide to grant this licence to whatever extent, then the operating schedule proposed becomes effective law. So it needs to be enforced, needs to be enforceable. If you look at page 82 of your agenda, it says, for example, sound monitors used to ensure levels are within acceptable limits, but it doesn't say what the acceptable limits are. And therefore, I can't, as a lawyer, enforce that. It says noise level policies in place, but again, that isn't something that I can enforce. It's not obligatory for the applicant to say precisely what he wants, but you need to be aware of the controls. In other words, if there aren't any, if it's so vague it can't be enforced, you need to be aware of that when considering the application. And it may be something that environmental health follow on, I've no idea. We'll see.
Yes, thank you, David. No doubt if there is a noise complaint, should this application go through, then it will be dealt with as appropriate by the enforcement teams as necessary. Are there any further questions of Mr. Thurston?
Chairman, Mr. Thurston has his hands raised just to come back on solicitor's comments.
Go ahead, Mr. Thurston.
Okay. Yes, there are. There are decibel levels. So with the fire regulations, there has to be a prescribed decibel level to each bed head from sounders, detectors and sounders. Apparently sound limiters are set to between 80 and 90 decibels. This is an average based purely on experience. Most live amplified events are between 100 and 115 decibels, but as we have done before, we've had exactly the same situation where I hope you don't mind me quoting the Queen's Hotel, but with the Queen's Hotel, we hosted events every Sunday in the garden, for which I had to vary the license. And they were most successful. We didn't have any issues. It's ironic that Portsmouth City Council used to put the Victorious Festival just about 100 yards away, which actually, deafened everybody. And yet we were scrutinised. But so you can imagine the situation when our staff were stood on the perimeter of the property with decibel meters monitoring our noise. We couldn't compete with theirs, but that's what you do. And it has occurred to me that because and I don't mean this in a bad way and in a derogatory way, but so far as monitoring noise is concerned, because of the amount of interest.
Go ahead, Mr. Thurston, I lost you briefly.
Sorry. Because of the amount of interest that we have had from local residents, we would employ the services of a professional sound monitoring company for one very good reason. If someone wants to complain, then they would have to have good reason to complain. And if they complained, they would have to prove their complaint, because we could prove the reality of the situation. I hope that makes sense. So in other words, if someone says there was an unacceptable amount of noise coming from Ormsby Manor, we would have a professional company to explain exactly how much noise came from Ormsby Manor, and that would be within the prescribed limits. I don't think it's for anyone to decide. I think it's down in black and white what an acceptable noise level is compared to everything else that goes on in the world, including traffic and ambulances and police cars, etc. So there is, I can't quote it exactly, but David is quite right in bringing the point up. But there are limits to say that you have to work within, and we would prove that, and we would certainly start by being monitored by a professional company to defend ourselves should someone wish to complain without justification.
Okay, Mr. Thurston, thank you very much for that explanation. I don't want to get embroiled too much about the noise. Suffice to say, it will be dealt with if there is any, and then we can argue about what levels are later on. Are there any further questions for Mr. Thurston from anybody else?
Chairman, I have no more hands raised.
Yes, thank you, Sammy. In which case I will now call upon Griselle Britton, who is the Commercial Manager for Environmental Health, to give evidence and make a short opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The officer who dealt with the application, unfortunately, is on leave today, so that is why I am presenting instead of her. We've looked at the application and we were happy that they have agreed to 2 of the conditions, but I've had discussions with Nicole regarding the top one, which relates to outdoor events. The premises is in a rural area, so obviously the background noise is quite low, and we are concerned that there would be a potential problem with noise from events being held outside, which is why we've put the request for having only 12 outside licensable events a year. Through my discussions with the applicant's representation, we have not been able to come to an agreement on that one. So at the moment, we are still wanting that restriction of 12 outside events to happen.
Okay, does that conclude what you need to say?
Yes, I don't think there's anything further.
Yes, thank you, Griselle. Are there any questions from members or other persons present?
A question from Councillor Wainwright.
Go ahead.
It's just a question to Griselle. This obviously on page 95, condition 2 and 3 actually, it says notice of vibration from amplified music taking place will be monitored at every event, and measures must be taken to ensure that any noise is not audible at the facade of the nearest residential property in the neighbourhood. And I understand that Mr. Thurston has agreed to, the applicant has agreed to 2 and 3. If that is taken into account, and obviously I think as the chairman has rightly said, any noise complaints are looked at and dealt with in the appropriate way through the enforcement people. So that condition number 2, it makes it quite clear that everyone will be monitored. And I'm sure, I mean, I don't know, it's probably a question for Mr. Thurston, but obviously there's very different types of music, amplified music. So obviously everyone will be looked at separately. I would agree to condition 2 and 3. I mean, why is your reasoning for this 12 days? So it's all right for 12 days to make as much noise as you like, but basically, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many events a year are going to be held, but I wouldn't imagine it's 365. You know, it's probably a couple every weekend or one a weekend, tops. I just wonder the rationale for Brazil, for your officers, to sort of come up with this, because condition 2 is quite clear that and condition 3, if it's indoors, they're going to close the windows. So I just wondered your rationale for this.
Okay, so condition 2 and 3 relate to all events going on in the premises. So obviously condition 3 is relating to internal events.
I know that. Yeah.
So we're not requesting any restrictions on the number of internal events that are held.
I know that. I'm just asking you, condition 2, basically, every event's going to be monitored. So, you know, we do have, you know, a rigorous, I thought that our enforcement people, certainly environment, acted on any complaints of noise. Is that not correct?
That is correct, Councillor Wainwright. We will act on any complaints of noise.
Yeah.
But
And could I just ask also? I mean, obviously, I'm not sure of the exact dates, but I think Ormsby Manor for weddings, I think the original license was granted in 2015. Perhaps you could confirm that, Gazelle. And secondly, during that period of time, which we're now talking about 5 years, have the council had any complaints whatsoever about noise? Now, I appreciate that this is a different application, but have we had any complaints of any sort over the last 5 years regarding Ormsby Manor?
okay, so Councillor Wainwright, I wasn't the officer who was actually dealing with the application. As I've explained, she is on leave. I have tried to contact her to get some clarification. Unfortunately, that was not possible. I have only been with the authority since 2015 and only been in my current role since 2019. So I'm not aware of any complaints regarding the premises since 2019. But unfortunately, Sarah Flatman would have been the best person to have provided the answers to some of the questions, because she has been with the council for many years and had been dealing with this application.
I mean, I know you only started in 2019, Gazelle, but you know, these questions should be able to be answered by an officer. And, you know, quite clearly, you can't answer it. Sarah's on leave. Now, everybody knew this application was coming up today, so I don't think it's an unreasonable question. But there again, you can't answer it. So there we go.
I think the explanation that's given in 1, 2 and 3 does cover what Trevor says, and also covers a little bit of what Gazelle is talking about. It's something for us to deliberate. I don't think we can go on past records or what anybody else has done.
No, but it's yeah, an officer should be able to
something something we will determine later on in the proceedings.
Okay.
Are there any more questions of Griselle written from anybody?
Yes, I don't know whether it's a clarification from David Lowans.
Yes, Chairman and Councillors, just to clarify, condition number 2 doesn't relate to everything. It's written so it relates to amplified music taking place indoors. Clearly, your application doesn't mention the playing of live and recorded music, as I believe the applicant company is relying on the, as it were, Live Music Act 2012 and other changes made, with thus a limit to 2,300. But just to be clear, proposed condition 2 that has been accepted relates to amplified music taking place indoors only.
Thank you for that, David. Are there any further questions of the officer?
Yeah, Councillor Gayler.
Thank you. Yes, I'm looking at the page 82 where we have section D, the prevention of public nuisance, and I'm wondering from Griselle whether it would be possible for the applicant to state the decibel levels in this section, which would then appear to cover the whole of the application. If those decibel levels are known in order that they can be enforced at a certain level, if they were agreeable with the applicant, perhaps that would clarify some of this.
Apologies, Councillor Gayler. I didn't hear the majority of your question then because you kept disappearing. But I think it was along the lines of decibel limits at the boundary.
Yes, I was wondering if we, can you hear me now? Am I clear?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, if we refer to page 82, where we have section D, the prevention of public nuisance, I was wondering if it would be possible, if by agreement between yourselves, and the applicant, to state the actual decibel levels that are currently enforceable, so that there's complete clarity. And I believe that this section actually covers the whole of the application. So it would cover outside, obviously, which seems to be the major concern, understandably, but also if there were to be a disco inside the manor that was extremely loud, that was somehow getting outside and causing a nuisance that way.
Yes, so there would be limits which would be acceptable. But as Mr. Lowens said, that condition 2 is to do with internal events, not the outside events. So if you could potentially change.
Okay, but this section on 82 describes the steps that the applicant intends to take to promote the 4 licensing objectives, and therefore seems to overarch anything else within the application. And I'm thinking that if the actual decibel levels could be agreed and then stated within this section, it might help to clarify the whole of the application.
Okay, that is something that could be discussed with environmental services by the applicant.
I might just add that that could also give the advantage to someone who feels that they are aggrieved, that if they had a calibrated sound meter, they could actually measure against those levels and look at the application and see whether they have grounds without having to make a complaint and only to find that it's not got any justification.
I understand where you're coming from. That does make sense.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from anyone for the office?
Chairman, we have some clarification from David Lowndes. We also have 2 questions from attendees, but we'll go to David first, if that's okay.
Yes, carry on then.
Thank you, Chairman. Generally, and I can be corrected by the Environmental Health Officer, it would be considered when you're considering nuisance as a certain level above background. In other words, a noise at 3 in the afternoon probably won't be a nuisance, the same noise at 3 in the morning can be a nuisance. Because it all depends on the background, how clearly you can hear it. I'd be surprised, therefore, if a strict decibel limit was given, applicable all 24 hours. The second point, frankly, is it's a bit late to be in this sort of discussion. Unfortunately, you have the application in front of you, and the applicant may or may not provide fixed decibel limits to you, and if they don't, you'll have to consider the application on that basis.
Thank you, David. Sally?
Apologies, Chairman, bear with me. A question from John Richardson.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you. Not quite a question. We've lived here for 4 years, and Ormsby Manor has never had an event in that 4 years. So I don't think there's anything that we could refer back to. I just thought it might be helpful for you to know that.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's my only point.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Richardson. Thanks for making that.
Chairman, question from Nicole Wright.
Yes, go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really picking up on a couple of points that were raised earlier by Councillor Wainwright and Mr. Lowens. With regards to condition 1, and the way it was stated, we still feel that it is unreasonable, as was acknowledged during the earlier discussion. In addition to that, I think what Mr. Lowens raised on condition 2, that it only relates to internal activities. Of course, on behalf of my client, I can say that if that were to relate to internal and external activities, that condition would be considered to be acceptable. If in your deliberations following this meeting you felt external activities should be also controlled and monitored, we would accept that condition as reasonable. In addition to that, if there is a similar condition with regards to precise decibel levels at different times of the day, as was discussed earlier, at the boathouse that you could use as precedent, and you felt that was also reasonable given the proximity of the two premises, my client would consider this a similar decibel level acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that.
Chairman, we have a question. Sorry, Chairman, we have a question from Councillor Gaylor.
Yes, thank you. In fact, in response to both Nicole and David, I'm thinking that if there is a better definition of sound pressure levels at different times of the day, whatever document it is that David might be referring to discover what these levels might be that would be acceptable at any time, that definition, if included in the section that I referred to, would be a much better way of doing it than a fixed decibel level. I appreciate there may be difficulties in adding it at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Gaylor. Are there any further questions?
Chairman, I have no further questions or hands raised.
Thank you. Thank you, Griselle, for your report. Moving on, I'd now like to invite Mrs. Jane Ingram to make her representation against this application by giving a short opening statement.
Mrs. Ingram, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, sorry, I apologise. I wasn't actually aware I was meant to be making a representation today. I thought Mr. Richardson was going to speak on our behalf. So I don't actually have anything written down or prepared. Is there anything? So I don't really know what to say. All I have to say is we've lived in Manships Farm for about 5 years. We've never had any problems with Ormsby Manor because I don't think they've had any events or anything. But obviously it's separated by a tree line, Ormsby Manor, and our just main concern is the events, what actually events will be put on. There's no sort of explanation really of what events there are. And one of our main concerns is the residents being able to leave till 2:30 in the morning, and I feel that's a very late to actually leave. The road is very dark anyway. I have an autistic son, so sleeping isn't the best for him anyway. So that would be a little bit of a problem for us. We're both workers. So it's really just the 2:30 being open, and that would be my concern. If you're having events till 2:30 in the morning, sorry, that actually is very late. And I apologise, I'm speaking off cuff here. I haven't really had anything prepared, so I do apologise. Thank you. I hope Mr. Richardson will clarify more for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ingram, for that. Does anyone have any questions of Mrs. Ingram?
No hands raised, Chairman. Oh, bear with me. Sorry, we've had a hand raised. Nicole Wright.
Yes, I just wanted to reassure Mrs. Ingram that my client has discussed with me the fact that he would be notifying the neighbours and local residents of events before they occur. So I'm sure that a reasonable arrangement could be made, so she's always aware of when an event is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
No further questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Sammy. Moving on, I'd now like to invite Mr. John Richardson to make his representation against the application and make a short opening statement to give evidence.
Okay, hello again, thank you. The original application, we were, like a lot of people who are residents and some of the other bodies as well, were quite strongly opposed to. The revised application is significantly better, and I did say this in a letter to the licensing department, so we appreciate how the applicant has responded in what we feel is a constructive way to our collective concerns. I think that the biggest issue we have is around noise, and if there are lots of events going on, and that can include weddings, and they are outside, and alcohol is involved, then this is a very rural area. Although there are quite a number of houses in Decoy Road and Main Road, sound travels, and there is a very serious concern that if there are a significant number of outside events, then there will be problems with noise. And I think this meeting has gone some of the way towards trying to mitigate that with comments about decibel levels and monitoring equipment. And the point I made in my letter is that only time will tell. I mean, it would be nice for the Council and Planning Department to try to put in as many reasonable safety nets as they can in that. But even if there was one event a year and it was very noisy, then there would be complaints. So what we're really saying is it's not the number of events that we have a problem with. Potentially, it will be whether there is a consistent problem with noise. Our final concern, particularly if there was a public event, is over congestion. And I have seen this just personal experience. And when you have a public event, and if it's not correctly controlled, usually by tickets, you can have hundreds of people turning up. And if you're familiar with the A149 and Ormsby, St. Michael, the road is busy enough at the best of times. And if you started to get queuing traffic there, I think there would be significant problems. And I think it would certainly be something that we would appreciate is if there were certain rules or restrictions over events open to the public, such that you didn't get this, if you like, mobbed event type of scenario. I don't think I've got any other particular points to make on behalf of the local residents, and I think I've covered what Jane at Manship discussed with me, although I can't officially speak on her behalf. So hopefully I've covered her points as well.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Has anybody got any questions for Mr. Richardson?
A question from Nicole Wright.
Thank you. Again, I would like to reassure the representative on behalf of the residents, Mr. Richardson, that my client does intend to communicate very closely with local residents, and I'm sure he would be happy to even provide you with his mobile number if needed, if you ever had any concerns. But you know, the noise levels would be monitored. I am pleased that Mr. Richardson is not concerned and has expressed on behalf of others that the concern isn't the number of events, which is specified in condition 1, which I think we all agree would be unreasonable to limit to such a few events per annum. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Yes, Chairman, a question from Jane Ingram.
Yeah, go ahead, Mrs. Ingram. You are muted.
Yeah, I'm just slightly concerned about saying that you're going to let the residents know. I believe Mr. Thurston said very early on in the meeting that he had invited all the residents to a meeting. Well, I unfortunately did not get that invite, so I'm just slightly concerned. I need some sort of reassurance that actually he is willing to share with the residents, because I didn't even know about the application until I was walking my son and saw the notice. So to me, I'm in my behalf, none of us, I wasn't personally invited to any meeting to discuss anything with him earlier. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ingram. I think Mr. Thurston did actually say that he would be communicating that. Whether we can enforce that or not is an entirely different kettle of fish. But suffice to say, he said that he would do so, and let's hopefully that will happen. Are there any further questions?
Yeah. Nicole Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairman, sorry, thank you, Sammy, also. Yes, again, just in response to Mrs. Ingram's comments that she didn't receive the invitation. That invitation was put in the letter that my client wrote in response to the objections, which were sent to Elaine. And I know that a copy of the letter is included in the agenda, but it's also, I think it also went out, if I'm not mistaken, it also went out to all the representation that came in. I'm not sure if Mrs. Ingram had submitted an original representation and so would have received a copy of the letter in response to that, inviting anyone to contact the client directly and to visit the site to have a discussion.
Thank you, Nicole. Any further questions?
Sorry, Chairman, just got back. John Richardson.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Rees.
Just wanted to make sure we were on it. I'm a little bit not sure about this issue that the applicant contacted everybody, because it was one of the people I represent who basically hand posted a note about the application, which most of us were unaware of. And the only thing I was aware in terms of an invite was to Carl Hess, my next door neighbour, to say, did he want to go over to meet at the location? And I'm with Jane Ingram on this. I have not had any specific request or contact to discuss this matter in any way. So I would question the statement that that there's that level of cooperation with the local residents really going on.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Richardson. I think when the application is put in, it's not usual for the applicant to write to everybody and invite them along. And I think they've done everything from a legal point of view to advertise the fact and give notice in the appropriate manner. So this is just an added courtesy, and if unfortunately you didn't get it, then really there's not a lot we can do in law to negate that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions?
Elaine Hignett.
Go ahead, Elaine.
Just to clarify, the letter dated the 9th of June from Mr. Thurston, which is on page 57 of the agenda. That was the letter that was sent out to all valid objectors following the receipt of the objections.
Thank you, Elaine. Any further questions?
Chairman Jane Ingram.
Go ahead, Mrs. Ingram.
Yeah, just to clarify, yeah, I did receive the letter, thank you, and it did ask if we needed to speak to him direct. So that was an afterwards, and when we objected and we got the letter, but I think we were talking about before, but you've just clarified, Councillor Carpenter, that legally they're not meant to be doing, they don't have to do that anyway. So in that respect, yes, we did get a letter from him. One of my concerns in the objection letter I wrote was on the licensing form. He said he had excellent relationships with his neighbours and the people around him, so I just query that he doesn't, because he doesn't know any of office. That was maybe the comment I wanted to make. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ingram. Are there any further questions?
No further questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Sammy. Moving on, we'll now confirm that we're moved into the closing statements, and I can confirm that no further questions can be asked at this point. So firstly, I'd like to invite Mrs. Jane Ingram if she wants to make a closing statement.
This is just off the cuff, really, so I apologise if it doesn't make sense or is rambling a bit. Just the fact of, obviously, Alton Manor is beautiful. I walk past there quite a lot with my son over the lockdown, my just concern is I moved here knowing that the A4149 was quite busy and traffic obviously would be quite noisy in the daytime, but in the evening is very quiet, and obviously I moved to the country for that reason. So really my concern is that if I want to sit out in my garden, I do not want to hear whatever music is going or whatever's going on or films going on next door to me, really. So that's one thing. Also, I appreciate that Mr. Thurston hopefully will tell us what events are on, so we are prepared, which is great. Thank you very much. But my concern is just the 2 o'clock in the morning is just quite late, and that's just my consideration. It's 7 days a week. When I work, my husband works. It is quite a late time. 2:30, people leaving on that road, slightly concerning. So I think that's all I want to say. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm sorry if I've waffled on a bit.
Thank you, Mrs. Ingram. Not at all. Moving on, I'd now like to invite Mr. John Richardson if he would like to make his closing statement.
Thank you again. I really would echo what Jane Ingram said, is that Ormsby Manor is a lovely property, and it's fantastic that it has been refurbished, and it's good. I think it's good for the area. We do have this simple concern that our lives may be adversely affected by noise, and that's the main thing that I would like the licensing committee and all of the councillors and everybody else to take into full consideration. And just to repeat what we said earlier, I think congestion, if things aren't controlled correctly, weddings, you know how many people are going to turn up at a wedding, or you usually do, and that can be reasonably well controlled. But I think if it's an open to the public event, then I could imagine there being all sorts of problems over parking and queuing outside. So I think that represents the main areas of concern for myself, my wife, and the residents that have chosen to ask me to speak on their behalf. So thank you for the opportunity. Unless you've got any questions, that's the end of my opening statement. That's my closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And lastly, moving on, I'd now like to invite Nicole Wright, if she would care to give a closing statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Very briefly, firstly, I'd like to thank the council for running the event so efficiently, because this is my first Zoom committee meeting. I have one with Baber and Mid Suffolk next week, and so I hope it's as well run. So thank you, because I know it can be challenging sometimes with technology, but it's been very good. I think there was a benefit in not having everyone's image on the screen apart from those at the council. So that's great. Thank you. And then just to reiterate one point, I think with regards to the first condition, I do think it is unreasonable, and I hope that the council would refrain from adding it as a condition to the license. Condition 2, as I mentioned earlier, I think in an amended form, it would address all concerns raised by everyone at this meeting. And condition 3, we've already accepted as it is set out. And lastly, I would again finally just like to reassure local residents that my client really is intending to run the event all events very well. And again, we'll hope to ensure that everyone is aware of what's happening, either through newsletters or just dropping in to keep them informed of events. So thank you. And I hope everyone found that we answered all their questions well. Thank you again.
Thank you, Nicole. Moving on, I'd now like to invite Griselle Britton to make a closing statement if she wishes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank the applicant for agreeing to the 2 conditions as they stand. As the current conditions stand, I would still request that the restriction to 12 outdoor events a year is in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Griselle, for that. And now moving on to, I'd like to invite John Thurston to make a closing statement if he wishes.
Yes, I do wish. So first of all, apologies, Mr. Chairman. I've referred to you as Graham and or Mr. Carpenter before now. It's not quite the same as sitting around a table in a committee room. This is the first Zoom meeting I've attended, so apologies for my bad behaviour. It's distracting just looking at an iPad. Anyway, good manners are everything. So I just wanted to say to Mrs. Ingram and Mr. Richardson once again, the condition regarding noise within the house. The house is not for partying. The house is for accommodation. The house will not make any more noise than anybody else's house. It's not for that use. It is not appropriate. It is not what we want. It is not what will be allowed. So that's the first thing. So whether the windows and doors are open or closed, it won't make any difference. And the 2 AM to 2:30, I think we put the 2:30 in, as lots of people do, because it's in theory after a wedding, which no one would be aware of. And I'll explain why. If that goes on till 2:30, then just to tick the box correctly and be well within the legal limits, it was a thought that people might take half an hour to leave the site. With regard to people leaving the site, I've already stated that people would leave the site in such a way, most probably within a small coach. At no time will there be congestion. At no time will there be people parking in places that they shouldn't park, on the roadside, in the church car park, as has been suggested. If we put, or hopefully when we put, a wedding or event on, it will be pre-sold so that we know exactly what we're doing, exactly what to expect, and it will, car parking will be accommodated. In the most unlikely event that something were to occur when we could not accommodate the transport that came with the client, then they would have to park off-site at some other agreed site, and once again ferried in by a small coach. But I cannot see that happening. So with regard once again to 2:30, we are not talking about outside events. We wouldn't be so stupid as to put something on that went. There would be daytime events if they go on, you know, weather permitting, into the early evening. You know, we have respect for local residents. We have respect for ourselves, like we have respect for Ormsby Manor. And what is inappropriate will not happen. Once again, to Mrs. Ingram and Mr. Richardson, we did offer, my wife Kim, because that's all we are, John and Kim Thurston. We're not a corporate entity. You know, we're not Virgin Media. We're just John and Kim. We're local residents like everybody else, and we respect our neighbours. And we thought that we'd just put it in that if we ever thought of doing something that may possibly cause a problem, we would consult local residents so that everyone feels they've had a say in the issue. And we thought we would also say that any public event that the public would pay to attend, local residents could be made welcome and you know, enjoy what goes on and work together. And we certainly wouldn't want to upset anybody's children. You know, our children are all grown up, but we do have grandchildren, and we would say exactly the same thing. Ironically, the only thing is they make more noise than us. But so I've apologised to the chairman. I've spoken about that, and so yeah, I've covered all of the points I believe that have been raised. And one final, I know that Sarah raised the issue of 12 days a year, but members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, it's not that we're going to focus on outside events. It is a matter of principle. We have been given permission to use the house and grounds for weddings and events, and we are a static and permanent venue. I've explained myself away about the timings for outside. They would not be there to cause a nuisance at any untimely hour. I do believe it's reasonably difficult to contain everything, to tick every box, because the situation changes. So once again, hopefully we will be viewed as innocent until proven guilty. And any local resident, Mrs. Ingram and Mr. Richardson, is always welcome. I do believe they have my telephone number. We can meet up at any time. Thank you. Oh, so there's one thing I missed out about, yeah, the question has been asked about decibel levels. Our son has pointed out in the West End, where he works with theatres, etc., in the West End, up to 124 decibels in a venue is achieved in a venue, but he mitigates this to 60 decibels outside using controls such as baffles, soundproofing and seals. 60 decibels is the same as a domestic hairdryer, can't be heard by neighbours, and every 10 decibels is a doubling of halving or halving of the level, is how decibel scale works. 60 decibels is much less than half of 124 decibels, if that makes any sense. I did mention it's fairly difficult to understand, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you don't make enough noise to disturb anyone, there can be no complaint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thurston. I think our solicitor, David Lowens, wants to say a few words.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. It was just to assist you to understand the precise limits of what's being asked for. Mr. Thurston has just said he's not talking about outside events to 2:30 AM. And it's not clear to me whether that is an offered condition not to have outside events at a certain period. Because at the moment, as you know, it's application for late night refreshment, for example, both indoors and outdoors, to 2 AM. And if you're a guest, until 5. It's an application in respect of alcohol on and off the premises, and the premises are the entire area, again to 2 AM. So if there is an intention to not run outside events for a certain period in the early morning, it would be very nice to know that and have the application amended.
Thank you, David, for that. Nicola, I understand you raised a hand. Do you want to say anything before we close?
Oh, yes, just in response to Mr. Lowndes' recent statement, I think the application remains as the application was made. I think my client may just have misstated intentions. Just
Okay,
thank you.
That's helpful, thank you.
yes, thank you for that clarification, Nicole. Right, everybody.
Sorry, Mr. Richardson has got his hand raised. Obviously, we said we'd have no questions. I don't know whether you want to allow him just to clarify what you want.
One last thing, Mr. Richardson. Can you
Yeah, sorry about this, but is a wedding an outside event?
Well, it can be. I think that's all we can say on that, really. I don't ask anyone to come back, as weddings occur indoors, and generally they do spill outdoors if the weather's fine. Anyway, moving on. Thank you all. We will now close this meeting and move to a debating session for members.
Sorry, Chairman, I don't know whether David Lowndes wanted to clarify anything or he's removed his hand now. But go back up.
It was just that the applicant's company has said that the premises internal will just be for accommodation. And on that basis, therefore, the events will be external.
Thank you for clarifying that, David. Right, to repeat myself a little, thank you all. We will now close the meeting and move to the debating session for members, and a further Zoom meeting will be convened at 1300 hours, which is 1 p.m. this afternoon, to deliver the decision. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just stop the live leave if I could ask members just to stay on the line until I tell you the live stream has stopped.